Today, as yesterday, we're talking about agreements signed behind closed doors without consulting the people directly affected. The submission of national interests to international interests, insistence on asymmetric agreements which bring no benefits except to small elites interested in profit. Yesterday it was migration, today we're talking about hydroelectric sovereignty, another dangerous example of neoliberal surrender, the Itaipu hydroelectric plant, neoliberalism and the hunger for geopolitical control. So last Thursday, on the 1st of August, Thursday, the 1st of August, Brazil and Paraguay had to suspend an agreement secretly signed between Presidents Jair Bolsonaro and Mario Abdo Benitez on the 24th of May. In spite of the mystery surrounding this agreement, some points came out very clearly and immediately caused popular protests. The resignation of the foreign minister, Luis Alberto Castiglione, and 3 other senior officials, the Paraguayan ambassador in Brazil, Hugo Saquier Caballero, the president of the National Electricity Corporation, Alcides Jimenez, the director of the Itaipu Binational hydroelectric plant, José Alberto Alderete. The opposition demanded a censure vote against the president and for the vice president. It was a political earthquake in Paraguay, and it's now gone to the Senate, where there are still demands for a vote of censure and his resignation. This is what the Paraguay president said about it a week ago. This Sunday, given the vulnerability of Paraguay in the face of this agreement, for the first time in our history, we are cancelling such an agreement. I think it's been a difficult day, but where democracy has triumphed, and we must continue this path of legitimacy, this path of dialogue. This president will not negotiate his principles or his ideals. From the presidency of the Republic and from the vice presidency, whoever has to give account for their conduct must give account, and we will not damage a single Paraguayan or dishonor the commitment we have made to the people. So what did people say in the streets about this? Our correspondent gathered some opinions on the 8th of August. What they wanted to do was get ahead with the 2023 negotiations and negotiate under the sheet in the shadows and discuss who was going to distribute the benefits from this cheap energy. And it didn't have to do with the energy and the benefits going to Paraguayan development, but there have to be limits. At the time of the dictatorship, they talked about the state was going to be completely electric, the whole country, and yet we don't even have electric transport in this country. In 2023, it will be at least $3.6 billion a year, and that's without the debt from Itaipu, which is another billion. So we have to take into account all these facts. Let's look at the new terms of this agreement that was so rapidly rescinded and led to the resignation of various senior officials. The teams of both governments established a timetable for the sale of energy from the hydroelectric plant at Itaipu up until 2022. But during that period, the amount of production would have increased from 1,370 megawatt hours in 2019 to 1,924 in 2022. And this was a key factor. One of the most polemical questions has to do with Annex C, where the excess production will be divided between the two partners, Brazil and Paraguay. However, this says that the country who doesn't use its own energy should sell it to the other. Paraguay only uses 15 of the 50% of the energy which it gets. So Itaipu has a constant flow of water throughout the year from the Piranhas River and other sources which produce electricity through its turbines. Let's look a bit more detail at the geopolitical significance of this. The Binational Itaipu hydroelectric plant. The name Itaipu is a Guarani name which means Rock of Dreams. It was opened in 1984. It's between Brazil and Paraguay on the Piranhas River, in the southeast of Paraguay and the south of Brazil. Its dam of concrete is 14 kilometers north of the Bridge of Friendship, and in Brazil it's next to Foz de Iguaçu. It's supposedly the largest producer of energy in the world, and produced an accumulated production of 2.5 billion megawatt hours, and its installed capacity is 14,000 megawatts. The electricity is distributed in Brazil by Furnas and in Paraguay by Ande. Amongst the geopolitical factors, there are these. Before its construction, Brazilian capitalists pushed for this to stabilize the supply of energy to their factories. Various peasant communities were expropriated and expelled to the benefit of big capital. A frontier problem between the two countries, which once led to the 1872 Triple Alliance War, was resolved because that bit of territory was flooded by the dam. Both countries at the time were ruled by dictatorships, and the dam fitted them perfectly as a means to keep them in power. It was also part of Brazil's desire to expand its influence in the region and guarantee its future as a great power. It had to do with the dispute between Brazil and Argentina, where Brazil wanted to gain ground over Argentina, and getting close to Paraguay allowed it to incorporate Paraguay into its sphere of influence. At the same time, Paraguay would be favored by the rivalry, because soon Argentina would also propose building another net. This is the opposition of environmentalists and others was not taken account of. It was minimized. All opposition was minimized. So, there's a lot to talk about. So, let's look at Sputnik, the Russian agency, on the 9th of August, which says, on that day, the leftist Senator Jacques Wagner of the Workers' Party has overseen the setting up of a commission formed by 3 members. It would have 60 days to do its work. He said the intense repercussions, negative repercussions, could compromise Brazil's bilateral relations with Paraguay and cast a shadow over the review of Annex C, Itaipu's Annex C, which has to be completely reformulated in 2023. That's what the senator said in his opinion. And he said that if the relations between the countries deteriorate, Brazil could run the risk of being going without the energy which Paraguay supplies it from Itaipu. And now ABC Color in Paraguay. Abdo gives his version and says he has nothing to hide. This Paraguayan paper on the 6th of this month showed grabs of chats between Mario Abdo Benitez and the head of ANDE, Pedro Ferreira, and he says, Pedro, we need a quick solution. ANDE, Electrabas, everything stopped. We need to move the economy on. Itaipu is the tool. We can't win everything in a negotiation. And we may have to sacrifice some positions, even principles. That's what he said in his chat. So these chats show that they were in favor of the terms of that deal favoring Brazil. But anyway, we ask our analysts about that later. Now let's go to Nodal. Careful of the piranhas in Itaipu. This was on the 5th of this month. Gustavo Codas, who was the former director of the Itaipu hydroelectric plant. What does Gustavo say? The piranhas in the Brazilian electricity sector are well known in that country. They have their lobbyists who act the whole time, but in Paraguay this was a novelty. We knew of their existence in 2008 and 2009, and now they have burst onto the public scene in Paraguay. These are small countries who try to get into the buying and selling of electricity, making money out of the margins of difference in the oscillations of the price. The risks and opportunities of the Brazilian market are an area completely unknown to in Paraguay, but that's how the model works. But what is the model that we want? What would benefit? What model would benefit Paraguay? That's what's in debate in this crisis. Paraguay comes out of the curse of just giving energy away to one where it's now more dependent on a model where the market rules, and we've begun badly because it's the Piranhas who've decided how that agreement would be drafted. We'll put that to our analysts as well. Now, I'd like to bring in our correspondent Osvaldo Zayas in Asunción, who's been following this news. Thank you, Osvaldo. So, has the crisis finished, Osvaldo? The political crisis has not ended for President Mario Abdo Benitez for the use of the energy from Itaipu, which it shares with Brazil. The opposition and the Electricity Workers Union says this was a betrayal of national interests because Itaipu is the biggest electricity producer in the world and the most important possession of Paraguay, and that he was giving up Paraguay's sovereignty over it. This led to the resignation of those ministers and officials, but the demand for a vote of censure is continuing in Congress. Why is it so important for Paraguay? Because in 2023, the founding treaty has to be renegotiated, the terms have to be renegotiated, and that will decide how the benefits are divided And this was going to change the terms of those agreements very much to the disadvantage of Paraguay. And we believe there has been intervention by the US embassy here. And they said they have supported Mario Abdo Benitez in this issue, the US embassy. And the social movements have said that the lack of transparency was one of the worst things about this agreement, because there are suggestions of corruption as well, in order to give contracts to private companies. And this is the reason why they are demanding a political trial or a vote of censure. This is the greatest generator of income for Paraguay, even more than soya, which is currently declining. And the biggest debate around this and the political crisis continues. Thank you, Osvaldo. Thank you to our correspondent there. This kind of thing didn't happen in the so-called one decade, the previous decade. So why is it happening now? That's one of the questions we want to ask. And who are these piranhas that Gustavo Codas talked about? So we'll have a pause and talk about that after it. Welcome back. We continue critical moves, Itaipu, hydroelectric plant, neoliberalism, and the hunger for geopolitical control. So let's go back to those questions we asked before the break. So what's the logic here? If we look at the history of Paraguay, President Fernando Lugo was elected promising energy sovereignty. He drew up an agreement with President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, which led to some benefits. So why? But then, now President Mario Abdo Benitez has signed an agreement that immediately produced huge protests. What's the difference? Is it possible to think of a fair, transparent agreement under these new policies of the right? The scandal involving the government of Mario Abdo Benitez is a reflection of the kind of integration that the right in Latin America is proposing, based on relations of power between the participants, in this case between Paraguay and Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro understands regional integration from an opposite perspective to that of Luis Inácio Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff of the Workers' Party. The former metal worker had a regionalist orientation, which took precedence over the strictly commercial orientation. He saw it as an interconnected, complementary space. Bolsonaro has a notion of regionalism only based on the liberalization of commerce the kind of logic based which has predominated in the alliance of the Pacific. Since he doesn't have a political orientation for integration, Bolsonaro will tear up any agreement that doesn't bring him commercial benefits immediately. For Lula, it was different. Brazil represented 75% of Mercosur, but it had very friendly negotiations with Bolivia after the nationalization of Brazil's refineries in that country. Brazil always looked for cooperative solutions to that dispute, and it produced results. In 2009, Lula and the Paraguayan president, Fernando Lugo, signed an agreement on Itaipu, which was described as historic. Paraguay got many of its demands recognized and increased the compensation it received from Brazil for the energy it delivered. Very different is the situation between Bolsonaro and Abdo, because there it's just a question of profit that predominates. So, the rights of Paraguay over Itaipu, time for analysis. We're now going to talk to Juan Martins, lawyer, criminologist, and researcher at CONACYT UNIP in ESIP. And some of the testimonies we heard earlier called this a sellout, and that it's caused a political earthquake in the country. Do you think this sets a precedent? Before Mario Abdo Benitez has even completed a year in power, he's lost a lot of legitimacy. He's a businessman before being a president. He's been accused of being close to illicit businesses over the border. And at the moment, I think what has become clear after this secret agreement is the kind of agreement that the Latin American elites have often been involved in, especially with the Paulista industrial elite in Sao Paulo, which is also based on the extraction of natural resources. Mario Abdo Benitez also represents the Paraguayan oligarchy. He's a hangover from the Stroessner dictatorship, and the interests of the country and the people of the country is not their priority, but rather their family businesses, the businesses of their friends, to extract resources, to enrich small sections of the population. The new thing here is the huge reaction of the population, students, workers, academics. For all of them, it seemed that Itaipu didn't matter so much to people, but now we see it does. A large portion of the population are understanding about the shameful negotiations that have been going on. And Paraguay has a structural fund to finance schools, research, and so forth, which was set up under Fernando Lugo, and all this funding is being cut by the current president, Mario Abdo Benitez. So the perception we are having now is that all these interests are being sold out. Looking forward to 2023 with the renegotiation of the Itaipu Treaty, which was signed during the dictatorships in both countries. How is the current government now placed to undertake the new negotiations which have to take place? Well, it's really lost its legitimacy to engage in these negotiations with this attempt to do this dirty deal behind closed doors, which clearly goes against the interests of national development, where energy sovereignty is not part of their plan. So there's considerable concern in wide sections of the population who are taking up these negotiations as a banner, as a demand, as part of the public interest. They want social sectors to be involved in the negotiations, and they want them to have a vision and to defend the compensation that Paraguay gets from Itaipu. As you said earlier, there were indigenous and campesino communities who were displaced to build this, who were pushed out of their ancestral lands to build the hydroelectric plant. They haven't been taken into account. They have not been consulted in these negotiations. We could also include in the geopolitical considerations, I'd like to know what you think about this, the dispute which has had between Argentina and Brazil for hegemony, for regional dominance. Both of them guided by a neoliberal model, of course. Brazil, of course, still has this idea of trying to occupy territory indirectly, and the idea that what they use is theirs. They occupied Acre 100 years ago. In that sense, large areas of Paraguay are now effectively under Brazilian domination. They even speak Portuguese more than Spanish in some of those areas of Paraguay. And Paraguay is stuck something as the filling in a sandwich here between two bigger powers. And unfortunately, today, Paraguay is not contributing to any sort of balance in the region. And President Mario Abdo is simply fitting in with this logic. So unfortunately, Paraguay is not a mediator, but simply subordinates itself to the interests of the larger regional powers. In our article, we were recommending the Careful of the Piranhas in Itaipu by Gustavo Codas, who was himself the director of Itaipu, says more or less, what needs to be in debate here is what kind of model of buying and selling energy with Brazil should be applied, and that the piranhas of the electricity industry have been active permanently in this. That this was new for Paraguay. We were aware of them in 2008 to 2009, and now they've erupted onto the public scene. So who are these piranhas that Gustavo Godes is referring to? Is this publicly known?
No, lastimosamente, todo lo de Itaipu siempre se ha tratado como una manera muy
unfortunately,
secreta.
Everything to do with Itaipu has always been dealt with very much in secret. And this somewhat legal fiction of binational sovereignty is a sort of secret area of jurisprudence where there's not any public control over the finances, there's no proper accounting or accountability, where there are very obscure business models at work. And now we've just becoming aware in the last few weeks of these small companies linked to Bolsonaro's own family, in fact, who are dealing in the energy surplus from Paraguay, and that other companies are competing for this buying and selling of excess energy. And the background to all this is this dispute between the different the companies that extract value from public goods, which is our natural resource. Thank you, Juan. Thank you for having me. It's a very important topic for not only Paraguay, but for the whole of Latin America. Thank you, Juan, taking part in Critical Moves. I'd now like to talk to the journalist Juan, to the journalist Jorge Zarate. Juan was talking about the way that citizens have mobilized against this contract to defend the interests of Paraguay. How have the media dealt with this?
De abordaje coyuntural. En general, los medios en el histórico
the media historically
la posesión por parte de Paraguay de la mitad de la represa, pero este reclamo no ha sido
have had the position of defending Paraguay's interests.
Se trata de un hecho de injusticia muy grande en el país. Imagínate vos que desde la puesta en marcha de la represa en el año 85
when this company was set up in 1975, this was presented as a huge opportunity for Paraguay because it was worth many times Paraguay's GDP.
El Tratado de Itaipu es leonino porque establece que Paraguay, que solo usa
Paraguay only uses a very small percentage of the electricity that is entitled to, the half of the electricity it's entitled to.
Vamos a poner números hipotéticos, no son los números reales, pero 1 megawatt hora a precio de costo, supongamos, vale $10.
So if you add up the numbers,
entre 80 y $100. ¿Entiende la diferencia?
So the difference is between $80 and $100.
Que Brasil nunca compensó al Paraguay debidamente.
Between what Brazil uses
hubo un espacio en el que esto se reclamó
and Paraguay uses per unit.
Y su equipo de negociadores, que consiguió que Brasil triplicara la compensación que daba anualmente.
And the idea was that Brazil should triple what it gave to Paraguay
y se consiguió que pasen a ser $360 millones.
From $120 million to $360 million.
Muy pequeño en relación a lo que pierde Paraguay por no poder vender a precio de mercado. ¿Qué pasa en el 2023?
So what happened in 2011, 2013? The issue of renegotiating the treaty came up.
Paraguay puede reclamar vender la energía a precio de mercado. Y estamos caminando en el preparatorio de ese escenario.
So we're preparing this renegotiation,
que en general
which
es acompañado
in general is accompanied
a favor, pero no en el sentido de recuperar. Itaipu es,
with a discourse in favor,
lineal, es al Paraguay lo que es PDVSA a Venezuela, ¿se entiende? La única fuente posible de obtener un recurso genuino para transformar un país que tiene...
Because Itaipu was seen as the only possible source of resources to really boost Paraguay's development.
La agricultura familiar. Por eso es que Itaipu es tan importante para la población en su concepción de...
So this is why it's so important to the population in Paraguay.
El acto que configuraron los presidentes Benítez y Bolsonaro.
And why people are so upset by what's seen as an act of betrayal.
La situación en la que un hombre que le debe su continuidad política a Domination,
which leaves us in such a vulnerable situation.
Va a renegociar esta situación, ¿se entiende? Está objetado.
So that's why people have objected to it so much.
Gracias, Jorge, por este tiempo. Ha sido un placer
Thank you,
tenernos
Jorge,
estos
for your
minutos por la vía
time.
telefónica.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Thank you.
Y seguimos en contacto.
Nos seguimos escuchando y espero que para la próxima nos podamos ver. Bueno, sí es una cuestión de neoliberalismo, como siempre.
So, this is a question of neoliberalism.
Esta cuestión dicotómica de un modelo de país u otro, es decir, lo
The
ideológico,
dispute
lo que
between
tiene que
one
ver
model
con
of a
el
country
proyecto,
and
con el
another
programa
model
del
of a
país.
country.
Y esto se conjuga con un plan de
And this comes
militarización
together with a plan to militarize the triple frontier on using the pretext of terrorism. And we'll talk about that after this next break. So what's the connection between those two themes? We'll be back.
Binational Itaipu,
So, Itaipu hydroelectric plant, neoliberalism, and the hunger for geopolitical control. So, there's a threat to territory and to energy sovereignty. Let's take a look at what the implication of the militarization of the triple frontier, on the basis of this anti-terrorist alliance recently signed on the 2nd of August. How does that fit in? The energy sovereignty of each South American country goes hand in hand with regional integration. That was what was understood by UNASUR, which when it was set up, set energy integration as one of its priorities. More than 30% of the regional supply is renewable energy. Much of it hydroelectric, 45% in Brazil, followed by Venezuela, Paraguay, and Colombia, with more than 80% of the total hydroelectric capacity of South America. Paraguay has a privileged position as the third producer of hydro energy, and particularly through Itaipu. In this situation, we have to include the situation, the agreement signed on the 19th of July between Buenos Aires, the United States, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay to create an anti-terrorist coordination to overlook the triple frontier between the three countries, which could be an excuse by the United States to militarize and control those foreign spaces. The Guarani water basin is the biggest water resource in the world, and of course there are many mineral resources in the region as well. All this can be overseen from the Estigarribia air base in Bolivia, built in 2005. These resources can be supervised, including the gas reserves in Tarija in Bolivia. So there is a lot at stake here in terms of natural resources. So now we're going to talk to Ernesto Wong, political scientist and international analyst. So there seem to be a lot of unclear interests at work here. In this kind of conflict, where large powers at work, in this case the United States, there are a lot of interests at play, because through the oligarchies there's an expression of power, and we know these oligarchies have begun to have relations with other emerging powers like China, but when they see the forces of the left rising, they unite again. So in the case of the censure motion against President Mario Abdo, and a part of the Colorado Party, his own Colorado Party, who joined in the call for a vote of censure. But there's also another movement based on the Wasu front of Fernando Lugo, has a lot of weight in this. They were, of course, victims. The government of Fernando Lugo was the victim of a covert operation against him when they brought out a judgment against him, and there was a parliamentary coup against him. And the Liberal Party who led that move against Lugo is now one of the ones pushing the censure motion against Mario Abdo. But behind this, the triple frontier has to be put in the context of the US efforts to have more influence in the Amazon basin, which is part of the strategic policy of the United States to control the great wealth of Amazonia from the north and from the south. They used this against Lugo with the supposed guerrilla terrorist groups that appeared, and which then disappeared almost immediately that Lugo was removed from office and the Colorado Party came back into office. So suggests that there may have been groups promoted by the Colorado Party. The Colorado Party is, of course, the party set up by the dictator Alfredo Stroessner. So in this context, the fact that the Paraguayan people have been mobilizing against this secret deal is a demonstration of the culture of the Paraguayan people, which goes all the way back to President Francia, who closed the doors of Paraguay to develop an endogenous project, a self-sufficient project, which is in the culture and in the hearts of the Paraguayan people, and it's clear in the way they want to defend their own resources. Between now and 2023, and many things can happen. Things are changing in Brazil. Things are changing in Argentina. So a lot of things could change.
Seguramente, pero yo pienso que va a haber un cierre de la oligarquía porque
But I think the oligarchy will probably close ranks,
Frente Colorado, ¿no?
They
Frente
usually
Colorado
come together to
negociar
negotiate their own
ventajas
interests.
y cosas, porque la oligarquía es ambiciosa
El Partido
y
Colorado.
también egoísta, ¿no?
The oligarchy wants to
es
defend its own
paradójico que
interests, of
Brasil,
course.
siendo el mayor exportador de energía
Brazil
eléctrica
as
de
the
América Latina y el Caribe y el tercero en el mundo según datos oficiales.
Paraguay is the
Eso nos lo
biggest
recordaba
exporter of
Juan Rosario.
export of energy in Latin America and the Caribbean, third biggest in the world.
Justo lo escuchábamos en un testimonio,
This
tanto
hasn't
que se nos
been
prometió que
reflected
todo
in
iba a
benefits
ser,
for the majority of the Paraguayan people,
electrificado,
we were being
automatizado, y
told.
realmente no es así lo que vemos en la cotidianidad.
Sí, hay yo dijera que se pone en cuestionamiento la veracidad
It puts in
de los
question
discursos, tanto de Bolsonaro como de
the
Abdo
truthfulness
Benítez.
of what
La
both
veracidad,
Bolsonaro and
y eso
Abdo
crea
Benitez have been
una serie de
saying.
frustraciones, porque
And it
levanta
generates
expectativas que
frustration
después
because
no
it
se
raises
cumplen.
expectations
Y
which
eso
are
causa
then not
mucha
met.
frustración
That
y
causes a lot of
respuesta
frustration
en la psicología del pueblo, ¿no?
and
Causa
triggers
mucha
these kinds of
situación
popular
ahí
responses.
en ese sentido.
Bueno, entonces, profesor, viéndolo desde un espectro mucho más amplio en este minutito que me queda, lo de la triple frontera también resulta estratégico. Lo abordábamos
So
la
just
semana
let's talk
pasada y
about the
decíamos,
strategic importance of the
preocupante
triple
esa
frontier.
alianza, ese grupo de
And there's
coordinación que surge
quite a lot of
entre
concern
Argentina,
about
Brasil,
this
Paraguay, con la
anti-terrorist
participación de Estados
alliance
Unidos bajo la
between
excusa de luchar
Argentina,
contra
Brazil, and
células
Paraguay,
terroristas ilícitas que se
brokered by the
producen en
United
esa zona, pero
States,
vaya que es
supposedly
estratégica, ¿no?
Hay
control.
un peligro para los pueblos, que la
I think
presencia
there's a
militar de
danger
Estados Unidos
from the military
que se
presence of the
ha
United
mostrado en
States,
todos estos últimos
which has
3,
been
4
clear
años,
in the last
hasta
3 or 4
bueno, en
years.
Perú, en
In
la
Peru,
misma Argentina, lo que
in
dijo
Argentina.
Macri, lo que permitió, y bueno, y en Brasil incluso, Bolsonaro dijo
And
que
Bolsonaro himself
iba
has
a
said that
recibir las tropas norteamericanas,
That he would
y
receive
los propios
North
militares,
American
sectores
troops.
militares fuertes en Brasil lo pararon. Lo
and
pararon.
the
Pero
Brazilian
estas
military themselves
contradicciones
stopped
se van a
him.
seguir reflejando, porque
Ya.
es que el capitalismo está en una
But
fase muy
this will
complicada y
continue
muy
because
crítica.
capitalism is
Y
in a
eso
very
va a tener su
complicated moment,
repercusión hacia
and
al
this will
interior de
have
la
its
lucha política como tal,
repercussions
¿no?
in the political
Y la
struggle.
ambición de Brasil
struggle.
se pone en evidencia, y es producto de que las empresas,
Ambición de
And this is a
disputa,
result-
política
la
de
ambición,
control.
que no hay una visión, yo dijera que
Because there's
global
not
de Brasil,
a global
generalizada,
vision
sino que
of
es producto
Brazil.
de las
It's
pujas
more
entre los grupos. Y el
the
presidente,
result of the
aprovechando su
struggle between
influencia
different
con la
groups,
familia, que es la propietaria
president
o una gran
trying
accionista de
to
Leros, fue la
assert
que se iba a
his
beneficiar en esto.
leadership
Mostrando entonces a un
over
Brasil
different
ambicioso
families,
que a lo
different
mejor en
groups.
la mayoría de las fuerzas allí no está en mente eso con respecto a Paraguay, que es un país muy pequeño, que podían...
And Paraguay
y
is
eso
not really
contrasta con las relaciones
their
que
main
tiene China,
concern.
Rusia, con los demás países más pequeños.
This is very
Cómo
different from the
tienen
way
una
that
posición
different
distinta
kind of relationship
de
that China
intercambiar con
or Russia have
ventajas
with small
favorables
countries,
para todos, el beneficio mutuo,
where they try to
ese
seek
tipo de cosas. Hay un
mutual
contraste que
benefits.
hay que
There's an
evidenciar en
interesting
este tema de
contrast
lo que
Bueno,
está
lo
ocurriendo
to
en
curioso
Paraguay,
es que
¿no?
put
Paraguay
there.
históricamente ha tenido esa sensación de asimetría, ese sinsabor de que las cosas no han sido justas y
been a symmetric
contradictoriamente
relationship.
se da una negociación que todavía lo pone
And there's a negotiation
en situación de
which
minusvalía,
puts
¿no? Por
Paraguay
decirlo de alguna
in a
manera.
vulnerable position.
Que esto se definía, el juicio político, por Carte, pero yo digo por
It was being said that the political judgment would be decided by Cartes and that distant sector of the Colorados.
operación escondida que hizo,
But depending on the size of the
el
hidden
pueblo se va
business that was involved in
a
this
poner la
deal,
última palabra allí en Paraguay.
I think Brazil will have the last word in this.
Para nuestra audiencia y para el equipo de
Thank you very
investigación.
much.
Pasemos a nuestras ideas finales.
So let's go to our conclusions.
Bueno, concluyamos, la verdad, todo.
So
absolutamente todo
everything has
lo que tiene
been
que ver con Itaipu
surrounded
ha
in
estado
mystery
rodeado de
and
misterios y oscuridad.
shadows.
Sí, es una cuestión
It has to do with Itaipu.
de capitalismo
It is a question of
fácil,
neoliberalism, of
como
capitalism in a
profesor
critical
Ernesto
phase, as
Maestre.
our
Este es un
interviewee
desafío
just said.
político que deslegitima
It's
la
produced
presidencia
a big
del
political
Paraguay,
earthquake
y
in
junto con la
Paraguay.
de Brasil,
It
liderada
also
por Jair Bolsonaro,
compromises
podría
Brazil.
ocuparles la silla.
So
Eso está
could
por verse.
somebody fall
Evidencia
over
modelo
this?
extractivista de las
That remains
élites
to be seen.
latinoamericanas que
but it shows the extractivist model of the Latin American elites, the struggles of power between different groups, oligarchies, who sometimes fight and sometimes come together to defend their share of the benefits. But the big hope is the citizen mobilization, which has understood that Itaipu is a national cause. And if we look at the spectrum of U.S. interests, we have the dispute between Argentina and Brazil. So, thank you for watching.